The future enlargement of the European Union is theoretically open to any European country which is democratic, operates a free market and is willing and able to implement all previous European Union law. Past enlargement has brought membership from 6 to 28 members since the foundation of the European Union as the European Coal and Steel Community by the Inner Six in 1952. The accession criteria are included in the Copenhagen criteria, agreed in 1993, and the Treaty of Maastricht. Whether a country is European or not is subject to political assessment by the EU institutions. There are 6 recognized candidates for membership: Albania, Iceland, Macedonia, Montenegro, Serbia, Turkey. All candidate countries except Albania and Macedonia have started membership negotiations. Kosovo, whose independence is not recognized by 5 EU member states, and Bosnia and Herzegovina are recognized as potential candidates for membership by the EU. Bosnia has signed a stabilization and association agreement with the EU which is undergoing ratification, which generally precede the lodging of membership applications, while Kosovo has completed negotiations on their SAA. On former Soviet countries not being parts of the EU, Heather Grab of the Centre for European Reform commented, "Belarus is too authoritarian, Moldova too poor, Ukraine too large, and Russia too scary for the EU to contemplate offering membership anytime soon." This was confirmed by a Polish-Swedish authored EU strategy which outlined full integration short of membership being offered to states in the east of Europe, but no enlargement perspective offered in the short to medium term. Current agenda. The present enlargement agenda of the European Union regards Turkey, the Western Balkans and Iceland. Turkey has a long-standing application with the EU, but their negotiations are expected to take until at least 2023. As for the Western Balkan states, the EU had pledged to include them after their civil wars. In fact, 2 states have entered, 3 are candidates, 1 applied and the others have pre-accession agreements. Iceland applied but, following new elections, has suspended accession negotiations pending a referendum. There are however other states in Europe which either seek membership or could potentially apply if their present foreign policy changes, or the EU gives a signal that they might now be included on the enlargement agenda. However, these are not formally part of the current agenda, which is already delayed due to bilateral disputes in the Balkans and difficulty in fully implementing the acquis communautaire. Recognized candidates. There are at present 6 candidate countries, who have applied to the EU and been accepted in principle. These states have begun, or will begin shortly, the accession process by adopting EU law to bring the states in line with the rest of the Union. While most of these countries have applied only recently, Turkey is a long-standing candidate, having applied in 1987 and gaining candidate status in 1999. This is due to the political issues surrounding the accession of the country. Membership is not a certainty in some of these candidate states. Serbia faces opposition from most EU states regarding its position on Kosovo, and many think that the EU is using the promise of membership as a way to force its politics onto Serbia. In Iceland, fishing rights and the consequences of the 2009 financial crisis keeps membership unpopular. In a poll taken in Iceland in February 2012, only 1/3 of those questioned stated they would vote in favor of EU accession. Albania. Albania applied for EU membership on April 28, 2009. Officially recognized by the EU as a potential candidate country, Albania started negotiations on a stabilization and association agreement in 2003. The SAA was signed on June 12, 2006 and entered force on April 1, 2009, thus completing the first major step towards EU membership. Following the same path of the recently admitted Central European and Mediterranean countries in 2004 and 2007, Albania has been extensively engaged with EU institutions, and joined NATO as a full member in 2009. It has also maintained its position as a stability factor and a strong ally of European Union and USA in the troubled and divided region of the Balkans. After the application for EU membership was sent by the Albanian government, On November 16, 2009, the Council of the European Union asked the European Commission to prepare an assessment concerning the readiness of the Republic of Albania to start accession negotiations, a process lasting about a year usually. On December 16, 2009, the EC submitted the questionnaire on accessing preparation to the Albanian government. Albania returned the questionnaires answers to the EC on April 14, 2010. Candidacy status was not recognized by the EU along with Montenegro in December 2010, due to the long-lasting political row in the country. In December 2010, Albanian citizens were given the right by the European Union to travel without visas to the Schengen area. On October 10, 2012, the European Commission evaluated Albania's compliance with the 12 key priorities that were defined in November 2010 as necessary to be met before the country could be approved as an EU candidate and start negotiations for accession. Of these, 4 were found to be met, while 2 were well in progress and the remaining 6 were in moderate progress. The Commission recommended in its assessment conclusions that Albania. On October 16, 2013, the European Commission released its annual report which concluded that the Albanian election was held in an orderly manner, and that progress had been made in meeting other conditions. As such, it recommended granting Albania candidate status. However, several states, including Denmark and the Netherlands, remained opposed to granting Albania candidate status until it demonstrates that its recent progress can be sustained. Consequently, the Council of the European Union at its meeting in December 2013, agreed to postpone the decision on candidate status until June 2014. On June 24, 2014, the Council of the European Union agreed to grant Albania candidate status, which was endorsed by the European Council a few days later. Iceland. Iceland applied to join the EU in July 2009 following an economic crisis. Prior to that, its relations with the EU were defined by its membership of the European Economic Area, which gave it access to the EU's single market and the Schengen area. As a result of their EEA membership, Iceland already applies many major economic EU laws and negotiations were expected to proceed rapidly. As in Norway, Iceland's fear of losing control over its fishery resources in its territorial waters was the most important reason for its reluctance to join the EU. However, the economic downturn in Iceland accelerated the debate, and the Independence Party, then the largest opposition party, agreed to the opening of accession negotiations after a referendum. A proposal to begin negotiations with the EU was put before the Icelandic Parliament in July 2009 and approved by a slim majority on July 16, 2009. Iceland submitted its application to the Swedish presidency in a letter dated July 16. And the application was acknowledged by the Council of the European Union on July 27. On September 8, the EU Commission sent Iceland a list of 2,500 questions about its fulfillment of convergence criteria and adoption of EU law. Iceland replied to the Commission on October 22, 2009. On November 2, Iceland selected a chief negotiator for the membership negotiations with the EU, Stefán Haukur Jóhannesson, Iceland's ambassador to Belgium. In February 2010, the European Commissioner for Enlargement and European Neighbourhood Policy recommended to the Council of the European Union to start accession negotiations with Iceland. The European Council decided in June that negotiations should start, and on June 17, 2010, the EU granted official candidate status to Iceland by formally approving the opening of membership talks. On July 26, 2010, European Union foreign ministers formally gave the green light for negotiations to begin and agreed to start the talks on the following day. The first annual report on the negotiations was published in November 2010. The main issues at stake remained the fisheries sector and whale hunting, while progress had been made concerning the Cyprus Dispute. In February 2013, the Icelandic chief negotiator stated that the main driving force for Iceland joining the EU was the benefit to the country of adopting the euro to replace the inflation-plagued Icelandic króna. Iceland's HICP inflation and related long-term government interest rates were both recorded to be around 6% on average for 2012. Most importantly, however, While the country retained the Icelandic krona, it was unable to lift the capital controls recently introduced in the turmoil of the economic crisis. Introduction of the euro, a far stronger currency, would allow the country to lift these capital controls and achieve an increased inward flow of foreign economic capital, which ultimately would ensure higher and more stable economic growth. To be eligible to adopt the euro, Iceland would need to join the EU, as unilateral euro adoption had previously been refused by the EU. On January 14, 2013, the two governing parties of Iceland, the Social Democratic Alliance and Left Green Movement, announced that because it was no longer possible to complete EU accession negotiations before the parliamentary elections in April 2013, they had decided to slow down the process and the 6 remaining unopened chapters would not be opened until after the election. However, negotiations would continue for the 16 chapters currently open. The new party Bright Future supports the completion of negotiations, while the other two opposition parties, Independence Party and Progressive Party, argue that negotiations should be completely stopped. In February 2013, the National Congress of both the Independence Party and Progressive Party reconfirmed their policy that further membership negotiations with the EU should be stopped and not resumed unless they are first approved by a national referendum, while the National Congresses of the Social Democratic Alliance, Bright Future and Left Green Movement reiterated their support for the completion of EU accession negotiations. Iceland's current chief negotiator stated in an interview in February 2013 that if the newly elected parliament supported the continuation of EU membership negotiations, it would be possible to complete negotiations by the spring of 2015, with a referendum on membership to be held after that. Following the April 2013 Icelandic election, the new Icelandic government announced that they were indefinitely extending the previous government's freeze on EU accession talks, pending a national referendum on the application. On June 13, Iceland's Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson informed the European Commission that the newly elected government intended to put negotiations on hold. European Commission President Manuel Barroso responded on July 16, 2013 by requesting that the new Icelandic Prime Minister make a decision on the continuation of their accession bid without further delay. Iceland has subsequently dissolved its accession negotiations team. Macedonia applied to become an official candidate on March 22, 2004. On November 9, 2005, the European Commission recommended that it attain candidate status. EU leaders agreed to this recommendation on December 17, formally naming the country an official candidate. However, no starting date for negotiations has been announced yet. Peace is maintained with underlying ethnic tensions over Albanians in the west of the country, who achieved greater autonomy through the implementation of the Ohrid Accords. Unlike Serbia, Macedonia has maintained sovereignty over all its territory. In 2006, Prime Minister Nikola Gruevski suggested that the country could join the EU in 2012 or 2013. However, the EU has never recognized this suggested time period. On December 17, 2005, the European Council welcomed and congratulated the country's achievements in implementing multiple reforms and agreements. The country has a dispute over its name with its southern neighbor and current EU member, Greece. Greece rejects the name Macedonia, because it says it implies territorial ambitions towards Greece's own northern province of Macedonia. Because of this, the EU refers to the country only by the provisional appellation the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. The resolution of the name issue has become a precondition for accession, since Greece has repeatedly confirmed it would use its right to block accession without a prior settlement. Concerns over the country's difficulties in reaching European standards on the rule of law and the economy and over violence and irregularities in the 2008 parliamentary elections have also cast doubts on the country's candidacy. The European Commission has recommended that Macedonia begin accession talks in 3 successive meetings since 2009. A solution for the long-lasting naming dispute however moved considerably closer, when the Greek Foreign Minister on October 4, 2012 forwarded a draft for a Memorandum of Understanding to settle the question. According to the Euractiv website, the proposal was answered positively by the Macedonian Foreign Minister on November 8, 2012. For Macedonia to begin accession negotiations, the country however still, besides solving the issue with Greece, needs to convince Bulgaria about removing their veto and block of negotiations. On December 11, 2012, the Council of the European Union concluded that Macedonia could start accession negotiations as early as the second quarter of 2013, conditional on reaching an agreement on its dispute with Bulgaria and Greece. The Council was encouraged that progress on the latter dispute had recently been made by a UN mediator. In early 2013, political instability stemming from the Macedonian parliament's approval of its 2013 fiscal budget through an undemocratic procedure threatened to derail the country's request to start accession negotiations with the EU. However, the crisis was resolved when EU brokered a compromise between Macedonia's political parties on March 1, 2013. At the most recent meeting of the Council of the European Union in December 2013, the Council for the fifth consecutive year concluded that the political criteria continued to be sufficiently met, but in regards to making the final decision to open accession negotiations, it was only agreed to revisit the issue in 2014. The decision whether or not to start accession negotiations will be made on the basis of an update by the Commission on further implementation of reforms in the context of the high-level accession dialogue, including the implementation of the 1 March 2013 political agreement, and on tangible steps taken to promote good neighborly relations, and to reach a negotiated and mutually accepted solution to the name issue. The Union mediator, Matthew Nimitz, has invited Greece and Macedonia to a new round of name dispute negotiations to begin on March 26, 2014. In February 2014, the European Parliament passed a resolution stating that according to its assessment, the Copenhagen criteria has been sufficiently fulfilled for Macedonia to begin negotiations for EU accession, and called on the Council of the European Union to confirm the date for the launch of accession negotiations straight away, as bilateral disputes must not be an obstacle for the start of talks, although they must be solved before the accession. However, it remains to be seen whether or not the Council decides to agree with the Parliament's opinion at its next meeting in June 2014. As of May 2014, the name dispute was still unresolved, but it was announced that negotiations were to be resumed after the Greek EP election and local elections on May 25. At the most recent Council meeting in June 2014, the fixing of a start date for Macedonia's accession negotiations was not on the agenda. Montenegro. In the independence referendum of May 21, 2006, the Montenegrin people voted for Montenegro to leave the state union of Serbia and Montenegro and become an independent state. After obtaining independence, Montenegro officially submitted its EU membership application to the European Commission on December 15, 2008. However, Montenegro has been experiencing ecological, judicial and crime-related problems that could slow or hinder its bid. Montenegro unilaterally adopted the euro as its currency at its launch in 2002, having previously used the German mark. Negotiations over the Stabilization and Association Agreement started in September 2006. SAA was officially signed on October 15, 2007 and came into force on May 1, 2010, after all the 27 member states of EU had ratified it. On July 22, 2009, a questionnaire to assess Montenegro's application was presented to the Montenegrin government by the EC. On December 9, 2009, Montenegro delivered its answers to the EC questionnaire. On November 9, 2010, the European Commission recommended that the Council of the European Union grant Montenegro the status of candidate country. On December 17, 2010, Montenegro became an official EU candidate country. In 2011, Montenegro's population was overwhelmingly for joining the EU, 76.2% being in favor according to polling and only 9.8% against. Serbia. Negotiations on a Stabilization and Association Agreement started in November 2005. Serbia's candidacy has been hindered by its relations with the breakaway state of Kosovo. Serbia has made numerous concessions on this to achieve candidate status, such as allowing Kosovo to participate in regional forums, and jointly managing their border. On April 29, 2008, Serbian officials signed an SAA with the EU, and the Serbian president sought official candidate status by the end of 2008. The Dutch government refused to ratify the agreement while Ratko Mladic was not captured. He was captured in Serbia on May 26, 2011, removing the main obstacle for obtaining candidate status. As of January 2009, the Serbian government has started to implement its obligations under the agreement unilaterally. The effects remain to be evaluated by the European Commission. Despite its setbacks in the political field, on December 7, 2009, EU unfroze the trade agreement with Serbia. Serbian citizens gain visa-free travel to the Schengen zone on December 19, 2009, and Serbia officially applied for the EU membership on December 22, 2009. In November 2010, The Economist stated that EU foreign ministers have agreed to pass Serbia's request for membership to the European Commission. The European Commission sent a legislative questionnaire of around 2,500 questions and Serbia answered to on January 31, 2011. On October 12, 2011, the European Commission has recommended that Serbia should be granted an official EU candidate status following its successful application for the EU membership. A deal was reached with Romania in late February 2012 over the rights of the 30,000 Vlachs in Serbia, removing Romanian objections to candidacy. On February 28, Carl Bildt, Swedish Minister for Foreign Affairs, confirmed that the EU foreign ministers agreed to grant green light for Serbia candidacy status. Candidacy status was granted by the European Council on March 1, 2012. On April 22, 2013, the European Commission recommended the start of EU entry talks with Serbia. On June 28, 2013, the European Council endorsed the Council of Ministers' conclusions and recommendations to open accession negotiations with Serbia, and announced that they would commence by January 2014 at the latest. The following day, the head of the EU delegation to Serbia, Vincent Degert, stated that the screening of the acquis had commenced. Screening of the acquis started on September 25, 2013. In December 2013, the Council of the European Union approved opening negotiations on Serbia's accession in January 2014, and the first intergovernmental conference was held on January 21 at the European Council in Brussels. Serbia was represented by Prime Minister Ivica Dodika and his first deputy Aleksandar Vučić, while the EU was represented by their Enlargement Commissioner Stefan Füle and Minister of Foreign Affairs of Greece Evangelos Venizelos. Turkey. The status of Turkey with regard to the EU has become a matter of major significance and considerable controversy in recent years. Turkey is one of the founding members of the Council of Europe since 1949 and has been an associate member of the European Union and its predecessors since 1964, as a result of the ECA-Euro-Turkey Association Agreement that was signed on September 12, 1963. The country formally applied for full membership on April 14, 1987, but 12 years passed before it was recognized as a candidate country at the Helsinki Summit in 1999. After a summit in Brussels on December 17, 2004, the European Council announced that membership negotiations with Turkey were officially opened on October 3, 2005. The screening process, which began on October 20, 2005, was completed on October 18, 2006. Turkey, with the 7th largest economy in the Council of Europe and the 15th largest economy in the world, is part of the common EU customs territory since the entering into force of the Euro-Turkey Customs Union in 1996. Turkey was a founding member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in 1961, a founding member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe in 1973 and was an associate member of the Western European Union from 1992 until its dissolution in 2011. Turkey is also a founding member of the G20 major economies, which has close ties with the European Union. Proponents of Turkey's membership argue that it is a key regional power with a large economy and the second largest military force of NATO that will enhance the EU's position as a global geostrategic player. given Turkey's geographic location and economic, political and cultural ties in regions that are in the immediate vicinity of the EU's geopolitical sphere of influence, such as the East Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts, the Balkan Peninsula, the Middle East, the Caspian Sea basin and Central Asia. According to Carl Bildt, Swedish Foreign Minister, the accession of Turkey would give the EU a decisive role for stability in the eastern part of the Mediterranean and the Black Sea, which is clearly in the strategic interest of Europe. One of Turkey's key supporters for its bid to join the EU is the United Kingdom. In May 2008, Queen Elizabeth II said during a visit to Turkey, that Turkey is uniquely positioned as a bridge between the East and West at a crucial time for the European Union and the world in general. However, others, such as former French President Nicolas Sarkozy and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, maintain an opposition to Turkey's membership. Opponents argue that Turkey does not respect the key principles that are expected in a liberal democracy, such as the freedom of expression. And because of the significant role of the army on the Turkish administrative foreground through the National Security Council, whose military-dominated structure was reformed on July 23, 2003, in line with the requests from the EU. Turkey's large population would also alter the balance of power in the representative European institutions. Upon joining the EU, Turkey's 70 million inhabitants would bestow it the second largest number of MEPs in the European Parliament. Demographic projections indicate that Turkey would surpass Germany in the number of seats by 2020. Other opponents to Turkey's membership state that it would also affect future enlargement plans, especially the number of nations seeking EU membership, grounds by which valor copywriter Giscard d'Estaing has opposed Turkey's admission. Giscard d'Estaing has suggested that it would lead to demands for accession by Morocco. Morocco's application was already rejected on geographic grounds, and Turkey, unlike Morocco, has territory in Europe. French President Nicolas Sarkozy stated in January 2007 that enlarging Europe with no limit risks destroying European political union, and that I do not accept. I want to say that Europe must give itself borders, that not all countries have a vocation to become members of Europe, beginning with Turkey, which has no place inside the European Union. Only a small fraction of the Turkish territory lies in the present common geographical definition of Europe, with approximately 97% of its land mass being in Asia, including the capital Ankara. The vast majority of its population lives in the Asian side of the country. On the other hand, the country's largest city, Istanbul, lies mostly in Europe. The population in the commonly defined as European part of Turkey is approximately 10 million inhabitants, which is larger than Sweden, Austria, or 15 out of the 28 present EU members. In addition, the EU already has a member state located entirely in Asia Cyprus to the southeast of Anatolia and part of Anatolia's continental shelf. Further, some oppose the accession of a largely Muslim country. In 2004, future President of the European Council Herman Van Rompuy reportedly stated, "An enlargement of the EU with Turkey is not in any way comparable with previous enlargement waves. Turkey is not Europe and will never be Europe." He continued, "But it's a matter of fact that the universal values which are in force in Europe, and which are also the fundamental values of Christianity, will lose vigor with the entry of a large Islamic country such as Turkey." Turkish Minister for EU Affairs Egemen Baygiz said in September 2013 that he believed prejudice by EU member states would ultimately prevent Turkey from ever joining the bloc, although he suggested it could have a very closely aligned relationship with the EU akin to Norway. Another concern is the Cyprus Dispute. The northern third of the island of Cyprus is considered by the EU and most states in the world to be part of the Republic of Cyprus, an EU member state, but is de facto controlled by the government of Northern Cyprus, which is recognized by Turkey. Turkey, for its part, does not recognize the Republic of Cyprus pending a resolution to the dispute under the auspices of the United Nations, and has 40,000 troops stationed on territory controlled by the Northern Cypriot government. The UN-backed Annan plan for the reunification of Cyprus was actively supported by the EU and Turkey. Separate referendums held in April 2004 produced different results on either side of the island, while accepted by the Turkish Cypriots in the north, the plan was rejected by the Greek Cypriots in the south. Potential candidates that have not yet applied for EU membership. Western Balkans policy. The EU's relations with the Western Balkan states were moved from the external relations to the enlargement policy segment in 2005. Those states which have not been recognized as candidate countries are considered potential candidate countries. The move to Enlargement Directorate was a consequence of the advancement of the stabilization and association process. The 2003 European Council Summit in Thessaloniki set integration of the Western Balkans as a priority of EU expansion. On November 9, 2005, the European Commission suggested in a strategy paper that the enlargement agenda of the time could potentially block the possibility of a future accession of Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Olli Rehn has said on occasion that the EU should avoid overstretching our capacity, and instead consolidate our enlargement agenda, adding, "This is already a challenging agenda for our accession process." Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina still has many economic as well as political problems. Recently it has been making slow but steady progress, including cooperation with the War Crimes Tribunal at The Hague. Negotiations on a stabilization and association agreement started during the year 2005 and concluded December 2007. This is the first step before making an application for candidate status and membership negotiations. The negotiations were expected to be finalized in late 2007, but due to the failure of the government to decide in time on police reform in line with EU principles, they could be finalized in late 2008 at the earliest. Due to the setback and the hardline positions of most Bosnian politicians, High Representative Miroslav Lajcak has stated that he will shift more of his focus for the time being from EU accession to reforms which would improve the standard of living in the country. The Union may show some leniency over economic requirements due to the political issues at stake. Former President of the European Commission Romano Prodi has stated that Bosnia and Herzegovina has a chance of joining the EU soon after Croatia, but it is entirely dependent on the country's progress. The SAA was initialed on Tuesday, 4 December 2007 by Enlargement Commissioner Olli Rehn and caretaker Prime Minister Nikola Angstrom-Pyrea. The initialing came in the wake of successful negotiations by Miroslav Lajcak in regards to passing his new quorum rules laws and also the commitment of Bosnian and Herzegovinian politicians to implementing police reform. The SAA was signed on June 16, 2008. According to the Foreign Minister Sven Alkaloj, Bosnia and Herzegovina plan to submit an application for membership between April and June 2009. However, an application was ultimately not submitted in this time frame. In February 2010, Alkaloj stated that Bosnia now plan to submit their membership application by the end of the year. Again, no application was actually filed. Citizens of Bosnia and Herzegovina gain visa-free travel to the EU in December 2010. Kosovo. As of July 2013, 5 of the 28 member states do not recognize the Republic of Kosovo as an independent state. As a result, the European Union itself refers only to Kosovo, with an asterisked footnote containing the text agreed to by the Belgrade-Pristina negotiations. This designation is without prejudice to positions on status, and is in line with UNSC 1244 on the ICJ opinion on the Kosovo Declaration of Independence. A stabilization tracking mechanism was launched by EU for Kosovo on November 6, 2002. It is an association process specially devised to promote policy dialogue between the EU and the Kosovan authorities on EU approximation matters. As confirmed by the Thessaloniki summit in June 2003, Kosovo was through the initiated STM process now anchored in the framework of the Stabilization and Association process, the EU policy which applies to the Western Balkans. On April 20, 2005 the European Commission adopted the Communication on Kosovo to the Council, A European Future for Kosovo, which reinforces the Commissioner Euro Unregistered Trademark's commitment to Kosovo. Furthermore, on January 20, 2006, the Council adopted a European Partnership for Serbia and Montenegro, including Kosovo as defined by UNSC 1244. The European Partnership is a means to materialize the European perspective of the Western Balkan countries within the framework of the stabilization and association process. The provisional institutions of self-government adopted an action plan for the implementation of the European Partnership in August 2006. The PISG regularly reports on the implementation of this action plan. Kosovo's declaration of independence from Serbia was enacted on February 17, 2008 by a vote of members of the Assembly of Kosovo. The fact that their independence was not recognized by Serbia, and consequently also not recognized by 5 EU member states, did not prevent the country from continuing its STM program, which aimed to gradually integrate its national policies on legal, economic and social matters with EU, so that at some point in the future they would qualify for EU membership. Kosovo's politicians announced in April 2008 that they expected Kosovo to join the EU in 2015, and the 15th STM meeting was successfully held between EU and Kosovo in December 2008. Negotiations for EU membership will only start once the country becomes an official candidate for EU membership, and for that to happen Kosovo first needs to sign a stabilization and association agreement with EU. Before becoming a member they will also likely need to be fully recognized as a sovereign state by all EU member states. On October 10, 2012 the European Commission found that there were no legal obstacles to Kosovo signing OSAA with the EU, as full sovereignty is not required for such an agreement, and recommended that negotiations start as soon as Kosovo had made further progress on issues in 4 areas: rule of law, public administration, protection of minorities, and trade. On October 15, 2012 this invitation was answered positively by the Prime Minister of Kosovo, who together with the Ministerial Council on European Integration agreed on a to-do list for public authorities to secure fulfillment in record time of the technical criteria for the start of negotiations on a stabilization and association agreement. Several days after Kosovo and Serbia reached an agreement further normalizing their relations, the European Commission recommended authorizing the launch of negotiations on a stabilization and association agreement between the EU and Kosovo, and on June 28, 2013 the European Council endorsed the Council of the European Union's conclusions on opening negotiations with Kosovo. Negotiations were started on October 28, and were completed on May 2, 2014. The agreement was initialed on July 25. Enver Oxhaj, Kosovo's Minister of Foreign Affairs, expressed hope that the SAA could be signed by the end of the year, though Angstrom Tefan Farwan Kortala, European Commissioner for Enlargement and European Neighbourhood Policy, had said in June 2014 that the treaty could be signed by the following spring if progress is made by authorities in Kosovo in enacting reforms and normalizing relations with Serbia. Progress of current and potential candidate countries. It was previously the norm for enlargements to see multiple entrants join the Union at once. The only previous enlargements of a single state were the 1981 admission of Greece and the 2013 admission of Croatia. However, the EU members have warned that, following the significant impact of the fifth enlargement in 2004, a more individual approach will be adopted in the future, although the entry of pairs or small groups of countries will most probably coincide. In July 2014, Jean-Claude Juncker, the President-elect of the European Commission, announced that the EU has no plans to expand in the next 5 years. Bracketed date, approximate and most probable nearest possible date, notes. States not on the agenda. EFTA states. Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway and Switzerland are members of a free trade area developed in parallel to the EU. Most prior members of EFTA left to join the EU, and the remaining countries, except Switzerland, formed the European Economic Area with the EU. None has current aspirations to join the EU, although Iceland was previously in discussions to do so and is still a candidate country. Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein is, like Norway and Iceland, a member of the European Economic Area and hence is already heavily integrated with the EU. Although it currently has no intention of joining, it might consider joining the EU if Switzerland joins, as it did with the Schengen Agreement. If it attained membership, it would become the smallest member state. Norway. Norway is not an EU member state, but adopts some EU legislation as a result of its participation in the European Economic Area through the European Free Trade Association. Additionally, Norway has chosen to opt into some of the Union's programs, institutions and activities. Whether or not the country should apply for full membership has been a dominant and divisive issue. Division within current Reader Euro-Green coalition has blocked the issue since the 2005 parliamentary elections. Norway has applied 4 times for EEC and EU membership. In 1962 and 1967 France effectively vetoed Norway's entry, while the later 1972 referendum and the 1994 referendum were both lost by the government. Norway's application for EU membership has been frozen but not withdrawn. It could be resumed at any time following renewed domestic political will, as happened in the case of Malta. A large issue for Norway is its fishing resources, which are a significant part of the national economy and which would come under the common fisheries policy if Norway were to accede to the EU. Norway has high GNP per capita, and would have to pay a high membership fee. The country has a limited amount of agriculture, and few underdeveloped areas, which means that Norway would receive little economic support from the EU. However, as of 2009, Norway has chosen to opt into many EU projects, and since its total financial contribution linked to the EEA agreement consists of contributions related to the participation in these projects, and a part made available to development projects for reducing social and economic disparities in the EU, its participation is on an equal footing with that of EU member states. The total EEA-EFTA commitment amounts to 2.4% of the overall EU programme budget. Norway is a member of the European Economic Area, the Schengen Treaty, as well as other treaties and agreements normally considered as under the EU umbrella. Norway was a founding member of NATO in 1949. Switzerland. Switzerland took part in negotiating the EEA agreement with the EU and signed the agreement on May 2, 1992 and submitted an application for accession to the EU on May 20, 1992. A Swiss referendum held on December 6, 1992 rejected EEA membership. As a consequence, the Swiss government decided to suspend negotiations for EU accession until further notice, but its application remains open. The popular initiative entitled Yes to Europe, calling for the opening of immediate negotiations for EU membership, was rejected in a March 4, 2001 referendum. The Swiss Federal Council, which is in favor of EU membership, had advised the population to vote against this referendum since the preconditions for the opening of negotiations had not been met. It is thought that the fear of a loss of neutrality and independence is the key issue against membership among Eurosceptics. Switzerland has relatively little amount of land area with agriculture, to which a large part of the EU budget goes. EU membership continued to be the objective of the government and is a long-term aim of the Federal Council. Furthermore, the Swiss population agreed to their country's participation in the Schengen Agreement. As a result of that, Switzerland joined the area in December 2008. The Swiss federal government has recently undergone several substantial U-turns in policy, however, concerning specific agreements with the EU on freedom of movement for people, workers and areas concerning tax evasion have been addressed within the Swiss banking system. This was a result of the first Switzerland-Euro-EU summit in May 2004 where 9 bilateral agreements were signed. Romano Prodi, former president of the European Commission, said the agreements move Switzerland closer to Europe. Joseph Days of the Swiss Federal Council said, "We might not be at the very center of Europe but we're definitely at the heart of Europe." He continued, "We're beginning a new era of relations between our two entities." The Swiss government declared in September 2009 that bilateral treaties are not solutions and the membership debate has to be checked again. Results of the February 2014 referendum on limiting mass immigration is threatening Switzerland relations with the EU. Due to the refusal of Switzerland to grant Croatia free movement of persons, the EU cancelled Switzerland access to the Erasmus research programme, and froze negotiations on access to the EU electricity market. Proposal of a new referendum to deal exclusively with the 9 accords with the EU was backed by 75% of people in a recent survey. Non-EFTA microstates. Within Western Europe, there are 5 microstates: Andorra, Monaco, San Marino, the Vatican City and Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein is a member of EFTA. The other non-EFTA microstates have signed agreements allowing them not only to use the euro, but also to mint their own coins. The non-EFTA microstates are also de facto part of the Schengen Agreement or have a largely open border with the EU and have close relations with their neighbouring state. For example, Monaco is a full part of the EU's customs territory via France, and applies most EU measures relating to VAT and excise duties. Close cooperation and inclusion in systems like the Eurozone are offered to them. This does not come without conditions. For example, the EU requires cooperation in tax control in return. Monaco has already implemented the EU directive on the taxation of savings interest. Andorra. In Andorra, the government has said that for the time being there is no need to join the EU. However, the opposition Social Democratic Party is in favour. Monaco. Monaco joined the Council of Europe in 2004, a move that required it to renegotiate its relations with France, which previously had the right to nominate various ministers. This was seen as part of a general move toward Europe. One concern is that, unlike the constitutional monarchies within the EU, the Prince of Monaco has considerable executive powers and is not merely a figurehead. San Marino. In San Marino, the centrist Popular Alliance has been reported to be in favor of joining the EU, which the ruling Sammarinese Christian Democratic Party opposed in 2006. In 2010, the parliament tasked the government to open negotiations for further integration with the European Union, and subsequently a technical group prepared a report on the topic including the options of EU and EEA membership. A planned referendum on an EU membership application for March 27, 2011 was cancelled by the government. A second referendum was held on October 20, 2013, and although voters narrowly approved submitting an application, the percentage of eligible voters supporting the motion was not sufficient to meet the requirements for it to formally pass. Vatican City. The Vatican City is an ecclesiastical or sacerdotal monarchical state, and as such does not have the democratic credentials to join the EU and is unlikely to attain them given its unique status. Additionally, its economy is also of a unique non-commercial nature. Overall, the mission of the Vatican City State, which is tied to the mission of the Holy See, has little to do with the objectives of the EU treaty. Thus EU membership is not discussed, even though it is in the heart of an EU member state. Eastern Partnership states. Since the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet republics of Eastern Europe, the Balkans and the South Caucasus have been looked upon as potential candidates for EU enlargement. The majority of them are or have been closely linked to Russia and would need to concentrate more on other European partners to attain candidate status. It is expected that these states will remain outside the Union for a significant amount of time, because they are not currently on any enlargement agenda. However, a summit in Mamaia, Romania, in May 2004 showed enlargement to be a definite possibility, though only Ukraine and Moldova were present, as Belarus was not concerned with membership. The South Caucasus states of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia have been the site of much instability since the 1990s. Their EU membership would be conditional on the political assessment by the European Council about whether they are considered European. Nevertheless, all three states have been admitted as full members into the Council of Europe after a similar assessment process. Before the first official visit of External Relations Commissioner Benita Ferrero-Waldner to the three Caucasus states, it was stated that if she were asked about enlargement, she would not rule it out. It is unclear as to when they may move towards membership, even though they are part of the European neighbourhood policy and are often referred to as part of a wider Europe. Since their only land contact with European states is through Russia and Turkey, it is possible that they would only join after Turkey did so. However, on January 12, 2002, the European Parliament noted that Armenia and Georgia may enter the EU in the future regardless. The ENP action plans adopted by the EU and each individual partner state states that the EU takes note of expressed European aspirations by the ENP partner. In May 2008, Poland and Sweden put forward a joint proposal for an Eastern Partnership with Ukraine, Moldova, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, with Russia and Belarus participating in some aspects. Eventually, Belarus joined the initiative as a full member, while Russia does not participate at all. The Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said, "We all know the EU has enlargement fatigue. We have to use this time to prepare as much as possible so that when the fatigue passes, membership becomes something natural." In May 2009, the Eastern Partnership was inaugurated. Its members include the European Union as well as the post-Soviet states Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. With the inauguration of the second Barroso Commission in February 2010, the European Neighbourhood Policy was transferred from the portfolio of the External Relations Commissioner to the Enlargement Commissioner. A Polish-Euro-Swedish authored EU strategy sees the eastern section of the Neighbourhood Policy being split off and combined with the Eastern Partnership. These states would be offered full integration short of membership, but no enlargement would be on the agenda in the short to medium term. Armenia. Armenia is geographically located entirely within Western Asia. However, like Cyprus, it has been regarded by some as culturally associated with Europe because of its connections with European society, through a diaspora and a religious criterion of being officially Christian. Armenia is still in conflict over the status of Nagorno-Karabakh and some surrounding, Armenian-occupied territory, internationally recognized as integral parts of Azerbaijan. Since 1994, a ceasefire has been in place, but tensions have remained very high between the two countries. Although the country's economy had one of the world's fastest growth rates in the past few years, this comes following a low base and many years of near-continuous recession. The Metsaima nuclear power plant, which is situated some 40 km west of Yerevan, is built on top of an active seismic zone and is a matter of negotiation between Armenia and the EU. Towards the end of 2007, Armenia approved a plan to shut down the Metsaima plant in compliance with the new European Neighbourhood Policy Action Plan. This is likely to take place by 2016 when the operating term of the Metsaima facility expires. Several Armenian officials have expressed the desire for their country to eventually become an EU member state, with some predicting an official bid for membership. Public opinion in Armenia suggests the move for membership would be welcomed, with 64% out of a sample of 2,000 being in favor and only 11.8% being against. The EU is Armenia's largest trading partner, and as of January 10, 2013, citizens of the EU will no longer need visas to travel to Armenia. Armenia negotiated an association agreement, including a free trade area, with the EU, but in 2013 Armenia announced plans to instead join the Eurasian Economic Community Customs Union. Azerbaijan. Corruption is a serious issue in Azerbaijan, and recent presidential elections were disputed and have been criticized for not being free, fair or democratic by international observers. Together with Armenia, Azerbaijan also needs to resolve tension concerning the situation of the unilateral declaration of independence of Nagorno-Karabakh and neighboring territory occupied by Armenia. The EU wishes to see the easing of tensions in the area. Belarus. The EU's relations with Belarus are strained as the EU has condemned the government of Belarus several times for authoritarian and anti-democratic practices, and even imposed sanctions on the country. Under its current president, Belarus has instead sought a close confederation with Russia, short of political reunion. According to the initial ENP plan in 2004, Belarus is considered a potential participant, but not yet ready. Because of warming moves by both sides, Belarus became a member of the Eastern Partnership in 2009 despite its non-participation in the ENP. Georgia. Georgia's former president Mikhail Saakashvili has expressed a desire for Georgia to join the EU. This view has been explicitly expressed on several occasions as links to the United States, EU and NATO have been strengthened in an attempt to move away from the Russian sphere of influence. Territorial integrity issues in the area were dealt with after the Rose Revolution, when leader Aslan Abashids was forced to resign in May 2004. However, Unresolved territorial integrity issues have again risen to the forefront in South Ossetia and Abkhazia as a result of the 2008 South Ossetia War. On November 11, 2010, Georgian Deputy Prime Minister Georgi Baramidze announced that Georgia wants to cooperate with Ukraine in their attempt to join the European Union. The EU and Georgia began a visa liberalization dialogue to allow for visa-free travel of Georgian citizens to the European Union. The action plan was delivered to Georgia on February 25, 2013. A ceremony on the initialing of an association agreement between Georgia and the European Union was held on November 29, 2013. The agreement was signed in June 2014. At the signing ceremony, Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili called the agreement a roadmap towards further integration and eventual membership in the European Union. The European Parliament passed a resolution in 2014 stating that in accordance with Article 49 of the Treaty on European Union, Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine, as well as any other European country, have a European perspective and can apply for EU membership in compliance with the principles of democracy, respect for fundamental freedoms and human rights, minority rights and ensuring the rule of rights. Moldova. The government of Moldova has stated that the country has European aspirations but there has been little progress. In 2005, the ruling party of Communists of the Republic of Moldova reoriented their foreign policy towards Europe. The unresolved territorial integrity issue of the breakaway Republic of Transnistria is a major barrier to any progress. On October 6, 2005, the EU opened its permanent mission in Chiana Floreanu, the capital city of Moldova. As of 2009, Moldova aspires to join the European Union and is implementing its first three-year action plan within the framework of the European Neighbourhood Policy of the EU. The Partnership and Cooperation Agreement represents the legal framework for the Republic of Moldova Euro-European Union relationship. The agreement was signed on November 28, 1994 and entered into force on July 1, 1998 for the next 10 years. This arrangement provides for a basis of cooperation with the EU in the political, commercial, economic, legal, cultural, and scientific areas. The EU is developing an increasingly close relationship with Moldova, going beyond cooperation, to gradual economic integration and a deepening of political cooperation. In August 2009, 4 Moldovan parties agreed to create a governing coalition, called Alliance for European Integration. The Liberal Democratic Party, Liberal Party, Democratic Party, and Our Moldova have committed themselves to achieving such goals as European integration and promoting a balanced, consistent, and responsible foreign policy. In April 2014, whilst visiting the Moldovan-Romanian border at Skruni, Moldovan Prime Minister Iori Leonca stated, "We have an ambitious target but I consider that we can reach it, doing everything possible for Moldova to become a full member of the European Union when Romania will hold the presidency of the EU in 2019. Moldova and the EU signed an association agreement in June 2014. Some political parties within both Moldova and Romania advocate a merging of the two countries. Such a scenario would incorporate the current territory of Moldova into Romania and thus into the EU, though the Transnistria problem would still be an issue. Ukraine. Many political factions of Ukraine advocate joining the EU and developing ties with Europe. Since the Orange Revolution of late 2004, Ukraine's membership prospects have improved. The then opposition leader Viktor Yushchenko hinted that he would press the EU for deeper ties, and described a 4-point plan: the acknowledgement of Ukraine as a market economy, entry in the World Trade Organization, associate membership with the EU, and lastly full membership. However, following ambiguous signals from the EU, Ukrainian President Yushchenko responded to the apathetic mood of the Commission by stating that he intended to send an application for EU membership in the near future. In September 2009, 2 Ukrainian diplomats, backed by a number of others, argued that Ukraine should submit a formal application for membership in 2010 in order to get a clearer message from Brussels, however it was never lodged. Public support in Ukraine for EU membership regularly polls higher than opposition. In a December 2012 poll by Razumkov Center, support had grown to 48% while the against had shrunk to 10.5%. Inside the EU, opinion is split. Several EU leaders have already stated strong support for closer economic ties with Ukraine but have stopped short of direct support for such a bid. In 2005, Polish Foreign Minister Adam Daniel Rotfeld noted that Poland will in every way promote Ukraine's desire to be integrated with the EU, get the status of a market economy country and join the WTO. Portugal also publicly stated it supports Ukraine's EU accession. On January 13, 2005, the European Parliament almost unanimously passed a motion stating the wish of the Parliament to establish closer ties with Ukraine with the possibility of EU membership. A 2005 poll of the 6 largest EU nations showed that the European public would be more likely to accept Ukraine as a future EU member than any other country that was not currently an official candidate. In 2002, then Enlargement Commissioner Garwan Fugan said that a European perspective for Ukraine does not necessarily mean membership in 10 or 20 years, however, that does not mean it is not a possibility. The European Commission has stated that future EU membership will not be ruled out, and in 2005 Commission President José Manuel Barroso said that the future of Ukraine is in the EU. Late 2005 then Enlargement Commissioner Olli Rehn stated that the EU should avoid overstretch, adding that the enlargement agenda at the time was already very heavy. In September 2011 European Commissioner for Enlargement and European Neighbourhood Policy Angstrom Tefan Farwan refused to include Ukraine Euro unregistered trademark as prospects for membership of the European Union in the European Union Association Agreement between the EU and Ukraine. At the 16th EU-Ukraine Summit of February 25, 2013, a joint statement of Ukraine and the EU reaffirmed their cooperation on political association and economic integration of Ukraine with the European Union on the basis of respect for shared values and their effective promotion. Ukrainian and EU officials convened in Yalta in September 2013 for a summit at which the issue of jailed opposition leader and former Prime Minister Yulia Tymoshenko's incarceration appeared to be a sticking point between President Viktor Yanukovych and EU leaders. Even still, Ukrainian officials received encouragement from Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski to sign a free trade and political association agreement with the EU. During a summit in November 2013, Ukraine refused to sign their association agreement with the EU, due to Russian pressure. President Yanukovych described the agreement as disadvantageous for Ukraine. This sparked massive pro-EU protests, with thousands of people chanting Ukraine is Europe, that ultimately led to the fall of the Ukrainian government. EU Commission President José Manuel Barroso later said we are embarked on a long journey, helping Ukraine to become, as others, what we call now, new member states. But we have to set aside short-term political calculations. On February 27, 2014, the European Parliament passed a resolution that recognized Ukraine's right to apply to become a member of the Union, provided that it adheres to the principles of democracy, respects fundamental freedoms and human and minority rights, and ensures the rule of law. In March 2014, the interim Ukrainian government signed the core elements of the association agreement with the EU, but parts of the agreement concerning free trade were left out of the deal pending May elections. Following the election, new President Petro Poroshenko signed the agreement. At the signing ceremony, Poroshenko voiced his hope that Ukraine would one day join the European Union. Other states with European territory. Kazakhstan. The Partnership and Cooperation Agreement with Kazakhstan has been the legal framework for Euro-Kazakhstan bilateral relations since it entered into force in 1999. Kazakhstan has a westward extension, which makes a strong case geographically for its European neighborhood status. In 2009, the ambassador of Kazakhstan to Russia, Adilbek Haksabekov, said we would like to join in the future the European Union, but to join not as Estonia and Latvia, but as an equal partner. This statement is mostly visionary and about long-term perspective, because currently Kazakhstan is not even participating in the European Neighborhood Policy, although the Kazakh Foreign Ministry has expressed interest in the ENP. MEP Charles Tannock has suggested Kazakhstan's inclusion in the ENP, while emphasizing that there are still concerns regarding democracy and human rights in Kazakhstan. Russia. During the preparation stages of the ENP, Russia insisted on the creation of the 4 EU-Russia common spaces instead of ENP participation, as it saw the ENP as unequal arrangement with the dominant role of the EU. In the framework of the EU-Russia common spaces in May 2005, a roadmap was adopted with similar content to the ENP action plans. Both the ENP and the EU-Russia common spaces are implemented by the EU through the European Neighbourhood and Partnership Instrument. Among the most vocal supporters of Russian membership of the EU has been former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi. In October 2008 he said, "I consider Russia to be a Western country and my plan is for the Russian Federation to be able to become a member of the European Union in the coming years," and stated that he had this vision for years. Russian permanent representative to the EU Vladimir Chizov commented on this by saying that Russia has no plans of joining the EU. Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin has said that Russia joining the EU would not be in the interests of either Russia or the EU, although he advocated close integration in various dimensions including establishment of 4 common spaces between Russia and the EU, including united economic, educational and scientific spaces as it was declared in the agreement in 2003. At present, the prospect of Russia joining the EU any time in the near future is slim. Former German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder has also said that though Russia must find its place both in NATO, and, in the longer term, in the European Union, and if conditions are created for this to happen that such a thing is not economically feasible in the near future. States outside Europe. In the Treaty of Maastricht, it is stated that any European country that respects the principles of the European Union may apply to join. No mention is made of enlarging the EU to include non-European countries, though an exception has been made for Cyprus and has been envisioned by some for states such as Armenia, and the precedents of turning down Morocco's application and defining Israel's closest integration as just short of full membership suggest that currently states outside geographic Europe are unlikely to obtain full EU membership. Despite such precedents, Cape Verde has expressed its desire to join the EU. However, some non-European states have different degrees of integration with the EU stipulated by agreements, always short of membership. Alternatively, such countries could be integrated into a larger regional bloc or an overlapping bloc such as Nicolas Sarkozy's proposal to create a Mediterranean Union, or a lesser organization such as the Euro-Mediterranean Free Trade Area. The current frameworks for development of such agreements are the Barcelona Process and the European Neighbourhood Policy. Canada. It has been speculated that Canada could, and some say should, join the European Union. Though Canada is not in Europe, EU member state Cyprus is not in Europe either. Through a similar culture, there is the possibility of membership. In addition, the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement is possibly the farthest-reaching free trade agreement between the EU and a foreign country. Because of the nature of CETA, some have said that it wouldn't be that far of a leap towards establishing Canadian EU membership. There have not been polls conducted on the opinions of Europeans or Canadians regarding closer relations and EU membership. However, Canada could meet the Copenhagen criteria for EU membership. Most Canadians share the European values that most Europeans possess. Additionally, the EU is currently Canada's second-largest trading partner, and with full EU membership the EU could become the largest. Canadian and EU officials have not formally commented on this possibility as of yet. Cape Verde. Cape Verde is an island nation of the Atlantic Ocean and a former Portuguese colony. In March 2005, former Portuguese President Mário Soares launched a petition urging the European Union to start membership talks with it, saying that Cape Verde could act as a bridge between Africa, Latin America and the EU. Cape Verde's per capita GDP is lower than any of the current member states, accession countries, or candidate countries. Most of the imports and exports of Cape Verde are from into the European Union, and it has a service-based economy. Its currency, the escudo, is pegged to the euro. Although the Cape Verde archipelago is geographically in Africa, there have been similar situations before. Cyprus is an island nation which, despite being geographically in Asia, has already joined both the Council of Europe and the EU. Furthermore, the Cape Verde Islands are part of the same island group as the Canary Islands and Madeira Islands, known as Macaronesia. There is currently no political recognition by the EU of Cape Verde as a European state, but unlike in the case of Morocco, there is no formal rejection either. Recently Cape Verde has been distancing itself from its regional African partners and forging closer ties with the EU. In a move signaling its preparation to loosen ties with the West African regional bloc, the government of Cape Verde in September 2006 declared its intentions on suspending the ECOWAS free movement of goods and trade. Prime Minister José Copyright Maria Neves announced that his country will start imposing restrictions on the entrance of citizens from all ECOWAS member states. This is also an effort to limit the recent rise of illegal immigration of other West African nationals using Cape Verde and its proximity to the Canary Islands as a springboard towards Europe. Israel. The principle of Israel joining the European Union has been supported by some politicians in both Israel and Europe, including the former Israeli Foreign Minister, Silvan Shalom, Israeli Minister of Foreign Affairs Avigdor Lieberman and former Italian Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi. 2 Italian MEPs campaigned in favor of Israeli membership as recently as 2006. An opinion poll in 2004 showed that 85% of Israelis would support an application for membership. Another survey in 2011 showed support for EU membership as 81%. The Israeli government has hinted several times that an EU membership bid is a possibility, but the EU itself proposes instead the closest possible integration just short of full membership. Faster advancement of such plans is somewhat hampered by the current instability in the Middle East and conflicts in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and Lebanon. European public opinion of some of Israel's policies, especially those related to the aforementioned areas of conflict is, in general, poor. Proponents of Israel's accession to the EU suggest that such accession would help promote peace, because being a part of a strong alliance like the EU would allow Israel to withdraw from the occupied territories with no fear of risking its security. The European Council has not been asked to take a stance regarding whether or not Israel is a European state, but similar circumstances to Morocco will most likely preclude its inclusion as a full member into the EU as well. However, it can obtain a large degree of integration through the current and future EU neighbourhood policies. The former Spanish Foreign Minister Miguel Ángel Moratanos spoke out for a privileged partnership, offering all the benefits of EU membership, without participation in the institutions. On January 11, 2005, Industry Commissioner and Vice President of the Commission Garwan Quarter Nter Fugan even suggested the possibility of a monetary union and common market with Israel. An argument for the inclusion of Israel into the EU as a full member is that it has a partly European culture, because the large number of Jews immigrated to Israel from Europe. Israel also has a GDP per capita similar to many richer European countries. Some claim that allowing Israel into the EU would create a precedent for other geographically non-European countries to apply for membership, but in fact this precedent already exists as Cyprus, which is already a member state, is geographically in Asia. Proponents of Israel's accession to the EU claim that Israel's situation is similar to that of Cyprus, a country outside of Europe geographically, but a part of Europe culturally and socially. In 2014, former Spanish Prime Minister José Copyright Maria Neves said Israel is needed by the European Union, in an address at the British House of Commons. Neves said his report recommends that due to its Western culture and the benefits it brings the European Union, Israel should become a full member of the EU without preconditions. Morocco. Morocco submitted an application to join the EU in July 1987, but it was rejected by the European Council later in the year on the grounds that it did not consider Morocco a European country. Although there are factors such as the developing economy or unresolved border issues with several of its neighbors and the occupation of Western Sahara, a European Union association agreement similar to that applied to Tunisia and Algeria is implemented between Morocco and the EU. The Moroccan government argues that a substantial amount of its territory is already part of the European Union, specifically Spanish enclaves in northern Africa that Morocco says are occupied territory. Special territories of member states. There are multiple special member state territories. Some of them are not fully covered by the EU treaties and apply EU law only partially, if at all. It is possible for a dependency to change its status regarding the EU and/or some particular treaty or law provision. The territory may change its status from participation to leaving or from being outside to joining. British dependencies, British overseas territories. The only country with the status of British overseas territory that is part of the EU is Gibraltar, which joined the EEC together with the United Kingdom in 1973. The other overseas territories are defined as overseas countries and territories of the EU. All of them are Euro except Bermuda are Euro or associated with the EU and their nationals are in principle EU citizens. Crown dependencies. Special terms were negotiated for the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man on the ICAR Euro unregistered trademark S accession to the European Economic Community. These are contained in Protocol 3 to the Treaty of Accession 1973. The effect of the protocol is that the Channel Islands and the Isle of Man are within the common customs area and the common external tariff. Other community rules do not apply to the islands. Sovereign base areas. The UK sovereign base areas, Akrotiri and Takalia on Cyprus did not join the European Union when the United Kingdom joined. Cyprus Accession Treaty specifically stated that this would not change with the accession of Cyprus to the European Union. However, currently, some provisions of the EU law are applicable theory Euro mainly border management, food safety and free movement of people and goods. Danish self-governing communities, Faroe Islands. The Faroe Islands, a self-governing nation within the Kingdom of Denmark, are not part of the EU, as explicitly asserted by both Rome treaties. The relations with the EU are governed by a fisheries agreement and a free trade agreement. The main reason for remaining outside the EU is disagreements about the common fisheries policy, which disfavors countries with large fish resources. Also, every member has to pay for the common agricultural policy, which favors countries having much agriculture which the Faroe Islands does not. Nevertheless, there are politicians, mainly in the right-wing Union Party, led by their chairman Karl Leo Johannessen, who would like to see the Faroes as a member of the EU. However, the chairman of the left-wing Republic, Harni Hodel, has expressed concerns that if the Faroes were to join the EU as is, they might vanish inside the EU, comparing this with the situation of the Shetland Islands and Aland today, and wants the local government to solve the political situation between the Faroes and Denmark first. On September 26, 2008, Karl Leo Johannessen became Prime Minister of the Faroe Islands, and according to him his new government is actively going to seek a progressive Europe policy, even stating that membership of the EU is a strong possibility. Greenland, a self-governing community that is part of the Kingdom of Denmark, held a second referendum on membership after the establishment of Greenland's Home Rule in 1979. The result was to leave, so on February 1, 1985, Greenland left the EEC and EURATOM. Its status was changed to that of an overseas country. Danish nationals residing in Greenland are nonetheless fully European citizens. They are not, however, entitled to vote in European elections. There has been some speculation as to whether Greenland may consider rejoining the European Union. On January 4, 2007 the Danish daily Jyllands-Posten quoted the former Danish Minister for Greenland, Tom Harjem, as saying I would not be surprised if Greenland again becomes a member of the EU. The EU needs the Arctic window and Greenland cannot alone manage the gigantic Arctic possibilities. Dutch constituent countries and special municipalities, the islands of Aruba, Curaçao Section O, Sint Maarten are constituent countries of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, while Bonaire, St. Eustatius and Saba are special Dutch municipalities. All are overseas countries and territories under Annex II of the EC Treaty. OCTs are considered to be associated with the EU and apply some portions of EU law. The islands are opting to become an outermost region of the EU, the same status the Azores, Madeira, the Canary Islands and the French overseas departments have. When Bonaire, St. Eustatius and Saba were established as Dutch public bodies after the dissolution of the Netherlands Antilles in 2010, their status within the EU were raised. rather than change their status from an OCT to an outermost region, as their change in status within the Netherlands would imply, it was decided that their status would remain the same for at least 5 years. After those 5 years, their status would be reviewed. If it was decided that one or all of the islands wished to integrate more with the EU, then the Treaty of Lisbon provides for that following a unanimous decision from the European Council. Former European Commissioner for Enlargement Danguta Harwan-Kortobneo has said before the European Parliament that she doesn't expect many problems to occur with such a status change, as the population of the islands is only a few thousand people. French overseas departments and territories. The territories of French Guiana, Guadeloupe, Martinique, Mayotte and Ra Copyright Union are overseas departments of France and at the same time mono-departmental overseas regions. According to the EC Treaty, all of these departments are outermost regions of the Euro, hence provisions of the EC Treaty apply there while derogations are allowed. The status of the overseas collectivity of Saint Martin is also defined as OMA by the Treaty of Lisbon. New Caledonia and the overseas collectivities of French Polynesia, Saint Barthélemy, Saint Pierre et Miquelon and Wallis and Futuna are overseas countries and territories of the EU. New Caledonia is an overseas territory of France with its own unique status under the French Constitution, which is distinct from that of overseas departments and collectivities. It is defined as an overseas country under the 1998 NUMA Copyright Accord, and enjoys a high degree of self-government. Currently, in regard to the EU, it is one of the overseas countries and territories. As a result of the NUMA Copyright Accord, New Caledonians will vote on an independence referendum scheduled between 2014 and 2019. This referendum will determine whether the territory remains a part of the French Republic as a sui generis collectivity, or whether it will become an independent state. The accords also specify a gradual devolution of powers to the local New Caledonian Assembly. Northern Cyprus. Officially, the island nation Cyprus is part of the European Union, under the de jure sovereignty of the Republic of Cyprus. Turkish Cypriots are citizens of the Republic of Cyprus and thus of the European Union, and were entitled to vote in the 2004 European Parliament election. The EU's acquis communautaire is suspended indefinitely in the northern third of the island, which has remained outside the control of the Republic of Cyprus since the Turkish invasion of 1974. The Greek Cypriot community rejected the Annan plan for the settlement of the Cyprus dispute in a referendum on April 24, 2004. Had the referendum been in favor of the settlement proposal, the island would have joined the European Union as the United Cyprus Republic. The European Union's relations with the Turkish Cypriot community are handled by the European Commission's Directorate General for Enlargement. Secession from a member state. There have been and are a number of active separatist movements within member states, for example in Catalonia, Flanders, the Basque Country and Scotland. If such a movement resulted in independence for a region, the newly created state may wish to become a member of the EU. In December 2012, the President of the European Commission José Copyright Manuel Barroso stated, in the context of the 2014 referendum for independence in Scotland, that any new independent country would have to apply for membership and negotiate its terms, but that the rest of the original country would not have to renegotiate its position and would continue its membership. The current EU treaties do not contain any provisions for secessionist scenarios, but it is expected that if a seceding province country reapplied for EU membership, admission would need to be approved unanimously by existing members. Precedents. There are no precedents for a region seceding from an existing member state becoming a separate member state of the EU, though some areas have left the EU EEC for autonomy or full independence without desiring to rejoin. Algeria is the only region or territory of an existing member state to leave the EU EEC upon becoming an independent state. Prior to 1962, it was an overseas department of France, an outermost region in EEC terminology, and has not attempted to join the EEC-EU after independence. Greenland voted to leave the EEC after gaining greater autonomy from Denmark in 1982. However, the similarity between this and other proposed scenarios is disputed. St. Bartholomew copyright Lemmy left the EU in 2012. This change in status was made possible by a provision of the Lisbon Treaty which allows the European Council to change the EU status of a Danish, Dutch or French territory on the initiative of the member state concerned. Possible future scenarios: Scotland. During the campaigns around the 2014 independence referendum in Scotland, there was debate over what would happen to an independent Scotland's EU membership. The Scottish Government, leading the campaign for independence, claims that Scotland could continue its membership of the EU after an expedited period of negotiations, and inherit the UK's opt-outs of the Euro and the Schengen Agreement because of the Vienna Convention on Succession of States in Respect of Treaties, adopted 1978. However, some commentators and academic analyses have rejected this claim. Borgen argues that the case based on the VCSS is difficult to sustain. Merkens and Borgen point out that the VCSS is not applied if it would be incompatible with the object and purpose of the treaty or would radically change the conditions of its operations, which would be the case with the Treaty of Rome, as a new member state would require voting rights in the Council of Ministers and seats in the European Parliament, etc. The VCSS is also only ratified by 22 parties and not by most of the EU states. James argues that, in addition to these points, whatever the legal argument, the realpolitik of the situation is such that it would be difficult for a newly independent Scotland to force its way into the European Union against the wishes of a sizable number of its members. This is more a matter of power politics than law. Since then, a number of legal experts and politicians have voiced their opinion on either side of the divide. Graham Avery, David Sheffer, Lucinda Croton, and James Crawford are among those who agree that Scotland would be able to negotiate its continued EU membership by the Scottish Government's planned date of independence in 2016. However, Avery also contradicted Salmon's claims that an independent Scotland would not have to sign up to the Euro and the Schengen Agreement. The UK government, citing individuals including Jose copyright Manuel Barroso, President of the European Commission, said that the remainder of the UK would continue to exercise the UK's existing international rights and obligations and Scotland would form a new state. In response, the Deputy First Minister for Scotland, the SNP's Nicola Sturgeon, said that the SNP government did not agree an independent Scotland would have to reapply for EU membership. Former European Court judge, Professor Sir David Edward, argued in a December 2012 paper that both Barroso and the SNP were incorrect. Given the situation would be unprecedented and the absence of any express provision in existing EU treaties on how to handle the situation, he stressed the obligations of good faith, sincere cooperation and solidarity in the EU treaties, arguing that lengthy negotiations would have to take place but that these would do so prior to the date of independence and that they would lead to a treaty amendment rather than an accession treaty. Roland Vorbel, a member of the Advisory Council to the German Federal Ministry of Economics and Technology, published a paper in May 2013 titled The Political Economy of Secession in the European Union, which stated that Scotland would remain a member of the European Union upon independence. The paper suggested that there would need to be a negotiation between the Scottish Government and the British Government on how they wish to share the rights and obligations of the predecessor state. Vorbel also stated that Barroso's comments on the status of Scotland after independence has no basis in the European treaties. Professor Lars Bo Kaspersen, head of political science at the University of Copenhagen, said that he believed independence could be a fairly quick transition. He continued, "I'm sure that the European Union in general would strongly support Scottish membership and the same goes for NATO. I can't a Euro unregistered trademark think of anyone who wouldn't think it was a good idea." In November 2013, the Spanish Prime Minister, Mariano Rajoy, stated that an independent Scotland's entry to the EU would require the consent of all the existing members and that an independent Scotland or other regions gaining independence would end up outside of the EU. The referendum rejected independence, leaving the matter theoretical. Catalonia. Since the announcement by the Catalan Prime Minister Artur Mas in December 2012 that a referendum would be held on Catalan independence, different scenarios regarding the status of Catalonia in the European Union have been proposed. Similar to the situation with the Scottish referendum, the executive has argued that Catalonia will be a successor state to the Kingdom of Spain and hence would automatically continue as a member of the European Union. The Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy argues that Catalonia would need to reapply for admission to the EU. On a European level, Spanish EU Commissioner Joaquín Almunia said in 2013 that Catalonia would have to apply for EU membership in the event of secession from Spain. A similar position was expressed by the European Commission President Manuel Barroso. Flanders, in case of a Flemish secession from Belgium, the future status of Brussels could be unclear. There are proposals for Brussels to stay part of the remnant Belgium, to become an EU capital district, a member state with heavy involvement and subsidy from the EU, or to be part of an independent Flanders. See also, European integration, Treaty of Accession 2011, withdrawal from the European Union, notes and references, footnotes. References. External links, official website, Enlargement Europa, European Union member states and applicant countries. European Navigator, War Crimes, Conditionality and EU Integration in the Western Balkans, by Virgin Dmitrijevic, Florence Hartman, Dejan Jovic, Tija Memisevic, edited by Judy Batt, Jelena Obradovia, Chalot Paper No. 116, June 2009, European Union Institute for Security Studies.